All right, good evening, everybody. It's funny, I know all of you, I think. So,
Hi, Bruce.
hi there, hi everybody. So welcome to VCA, and there are a number of people online tonight seeing this live that way. So thanks for joining us there too. You do have to, in the theater here, by the rules of the state, we still have to keep the masks on, and plus we don't want really to look at you anyways. I want to thank Windermere and Flintworks for helping us make sure that we can present all these talks online as well. And I also want to put in a quick plug to Allison and the staff here at VCA. I'm in awe of what they've managed to accomplish this last year. I'm not supposed to say this stuff, but I have to. Because of Allison, the doors are still open here, so thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, 4 years ago, I called my mother up on her birthday, and I said, I'm going to come and visit you in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I'm going to bring my friend Bob, and we're going to cycle back across the country after we spend a few days with you along the northern tier. And she's just totally silent. And I'm used to that. She's a Yankee, so she doesn't say much. And then finally she kind of clears her voice and says, "Oh, Bruce, that's a poor idea." And I'm sort of used to this, that all the athletic endeavors I've done in my life have always been sort of met with kind of, eyes from people that aren't my athletic friends. And I'm sort of aware that I've got these two groups of people in my life, all my rowing buddies and my cycling buddies and my running buddies. And then on the other side, I've got all my art friends and people in VCA and so on. And there's not a lot of crossover between the two groups. And then I've got my mom. And, I sort of realized that, this sort of brings it together. When I looked at the list of talks on the rock speakers, and I saw Martin Criminale, I thought, this is incredible. He's kind of one of my heroes in terms of endurance athletics. And to have him here at VCA, I thought, this is the first time my life has been put together in one full spot. So I think this is fantastic. So let me introduce Martin Criminale. He is truly one of the gods of that kind of athletic headbanging that many of us like to do. And he started off primarily as a cyclist, but before that, he just told me he had been a rower and actually went out for the junior national team and those sorts of things. So, and then eventually, through injury and so on, switched to running. So he has a lot of experience. He has ridden or run or rode probably more miles than I've ever driven in a car. And I think he might have the secret for how you keep doing this throughout a life of physical endeavor. So welcome, Martin Criminale.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Hey, folks. So I am Martin Criminale, kind of a heady intro to live up to. I'm 57 years old, and I am definitely an aspiring endurance athlete. I want to say huge thanks to Allison, Reed, Joseph, and Michael for making this happen. And an even bigger thanks to all of you for showing up here tonight and everybody who's joining us online. I used to joke that I'd let people know what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I guess I'm not quite there yet. But joking aside, in the last 10 or so years, I have finally started to get a handle on what I want to be. We all age or get injured or have periods in our life when stresses bring us down, but that's normal. Knowing how much enjoyment I get from moving and challenging myself, I want to ensure that I keep it up and do whatever it takes to facilitate that passion, regardless of my age or any other limitations that might be impacting me at any given time. So to explain this and tell you a little bit about myself, I'd like to tell you a story about Martin and how he learned to appreciate stuff. I was not much of an athlete growing up in grade school. Maybe I played foursquare on the playground, and that was about it. And I was the biggest complainer when my parents would drag me outside for a hike. Most parents will recognize these common refrains. And not much changed in junior high, but in high school, I finally started playing soccer. And then the last 2 years of high school, I rode on a crew team, which was my first introduction to seriously elevating my heart rate. But in college, that started to change. I joined a fraternity, and two guys I looked up to that lived in the same house rode bicycles. And since they were cool, it followed that bikes were cool, and I started to ride. It seems I have a tendency to dive into my hobbies with both feet. Within a year of starting to ride, I noticed one of my friends was racing, and then he was placing in the top 10. Well, we were the same speed, so logically I could do this too, right? There's only one way to find out. The next year, I was racing my bike. Maybe 2 years later, I was also racing cyclocross, which is another discipline of bicycle racing. Then came racing mountain bikes, and I also went to the national championships racing a tandem. So you get the idea. I was all in from the beginning. After graduating from college, I decided to follow my passion. And that meant working at bike shops and pretty much racing my butt off, which kind of equated to the path of least resistance as well. Early on in my bicycle racing career, I realized I wasn't really objectively fast or a very gifted climber, which are kind of the two most important things when you want to go quick on a bike. But I was excelling at longer and harder events. So really tough one-day races or multi-day stage races. And I figured out that if I could just finish as well as I could each day on these multi-day events, then my overall ranking wouldn't be too shabby at all. And this was even more true if the weather was hot or otherwise miserable, or the course is super hilly, or the headwind's strong. When other people gave up, I just kept on going. And so even though I couldn't beat them in a straight-up hill sprint or a flat sprint, a lot of times I was passing people by the end of the race and beating them to the line. Over time, I realized I loved being in the woods. Toward the end of my bike racing career, I was mountain biking more and more and racing on the road less and less. And the events that I gravitated toward were the 100-mile mountain bike races and the 24-hour events, because if you like being in the woods, you know, what could be better than being out there all day? And in some cases, that was literally all day. And in typical Martin fashion, to increase the challenge, I opted to race the single-speed category in these 100-mile mountain bike races. And in the beginning, I even did it on a fully rigid bike. Why? Why not, right? It definitely upped the challenge. It was in one of these 100-mile mountain bike events that I had a bad crash. The course was 2 50-mile loops, and after finishing the first lap, I was perhaps 2 miles down the trail from the start-finish area, just enjoying the scenery, when my front wheel hit a small stump that was partially concealed by the dust on the ground. I went over the bars and shoulder-blocked the trail at speed. For at least 5 minutes, I just laid there. And then for the next 5 minutes, I sat there, trying to collect myself. Everything hurt. But you know the adage about the hard man stereotype that is the classic European bike racer, which is idolized by probably every single cycling fan? Well, if you do, you might understand why I'm not even sure if I considered turning around and riding back to the finish. Not because I was tough, it just didn't occur to me. Instead, I got on my bike when I could, started super slow, and increased my tempo gradually as I was able. So, fun story, I had a good friend who was a very fast rider, still is, who was also racing the single-speed category on this day, and after I finished, he told me that he was so nervous that entire second lap. He kept looking over his shoulder, waiting for the moment when I would appear. And little did he know how safe his lead was that day. But hearing that sure helped soothe my second place finish. In the accident, I separated my shoulder pretty badly, and the joint never quite closed up all the way. During my recovery, for some reason, it hurt to ride more than it did to run, and that precipitated a big change in my athletic focus. Up until this point, all my running could be filed under cross-training. And honestly, I thought running was pretty dumb. It felt so slow. And well, slow. I mean, why would you want to run when you could ride a bike? Turns out I had a good friend that was on my cycling team, and this friend was a very accomplished ultra runner who was riding bikes while he was recovering from a fractured sacrum. But as he got healthier, more of our time that we spent together was on our feet instead of on our bikes. And by on our feet, I mean on the very same trails I used to hate hiking as a kid. What a change of perspective. It was pretty cool to experience that. Here I was going faster on these trails and enjoying them way more. After a while, what I used to consider an impossibly long hike was now our Wednesday morning training run. I'd be remiss if I skipped over a crucial detail. Back when I still identified as a cyclist, my wife started to run. Her goal was to complete a half marathon, and I was getting a huge kick out of supporting her at these 5 and 10K events that she was doing in preparation. And good thing, right? She had been driving me all over the Pacific Northwest, sometimes even flying to other countries to support my cycling habit. So I'd be lying if I said part of my motivation wasn't guilt, especially when you consider how freaking unfriendly most bicycle races are to the spectator. You start, and then several hours later, you show up back at the car, smelling gross and hungry and tired, and if you're lucky, you also have some road rash that needs nursing, but regardless, you never want to drive home, thank you very much. At some point during her training, probably just after she finished one of her races, I impulsively said, "If you finish that half marathon, I'll come back next year and run it with you." So be careful what you wish for. So of course she finished. And of course she had a huge smile on her face doing so. If you've ever been to a running race, it is night and day compared to a bike race. All these runners are so incredibly psyched just to be there. And to finish. All I had been focused on while racing my bike was winning. And if you didn't win, you sucked, or at least you were lacking in some way that is quite damaging to the incredibly fragile male ego. At these running races, it seemed like 90% of the participants were overjoyed just to cross the finish line. I had an awakening, and I'm not afraid to say I was also very ashamed of myself and my previous attitude about competing. This appreciation grew, and by the time my wife crossed the finish line at her half marathon, I was the guy jumping up and down behind the finish line fence, screaming myself hoarse with tears streaming down my face. For real, it was such a great feeling. I was so humbled and appreciative and really damn proud of her for what she had accomplished. With this new appreciation for finishing came the strength to challenge myself. In racing, the old adage is train your weaknesses and race your strengths. I had said earlier that I'm not the fastest cyclist. Well, that applies to running too. So what about going longer? Turns out there's this category of events called ultras, and boy, did that sound intriguing. Bonus that they are usually run on trails. Funny how you sometimes live a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are a budding runner and you hang around accomplished ultra runners, odds are you will soon have a very skewed perspective about what long means, and I was no different. So here's how my progression went. In 2010, I ran my first road half marathon. In 2011, I ran my first 10-mile trail race and my first 20-mile trail race, and then at the end of the year, my first trail marathon. In 2012, I ran my second 20-mile trail race, my second trail marathon, and then in 2013, Martin goes all in. I ran a 50K, which is 31 miles. I ran a 50-mile race, and I ran my first 100-mile race. Oops. If I had run more often than once in a blue moon before I dove into the sport, and then dove into ultras, it might have been okay. I had this huge aerobic engine from racing my bike, but what I did not appreciate was that running isn't just aerobic fitness. Your joints and ligaments need time to adapt to the impact and stresses that are unique to running. And I did not give my body enough time to adapt. Somehow, I stayed injury-free other than blisters and scrapes all the way through the 50-mile event. But around mile 70 of the 100-mile race, my left knee started to hurt. And it just kept getting worse, which was a huge bummer as this particular course finished down a long descent and then about 6 miles of flat to the finish. I had to limp down that entire descent and was alternating walking and jogging those last 6 miles. Turns out it was my IT band. which in retrospect, I guess, was pretty lucky, as this sort of thing usually heals up 100% and is preventable in the future. So lesson learned, give your body time to adapt, and do some maintenance like massage, foam roller, you know the drill. And as you can see, sometimes when you run on trails, you can also hurt the outside of your body in addition to the inside. Getting older, while I keep participating in long-distance events and continue to challenge myself, has been a learning experience. I used to joke with my physical therapist that as long as I didn't get the same injury twice, I was learning from my mistakes. And to my credit, other than my first significant injury, I have not experienced the same injury twice. But I have had my share of injuries. So that learning maybe is debatable. And some of these injuries resulted in extended periods of downtime. At one point, I started to memorialize all of my significant injuries with these Band-Aid tattoos. But my wife told me I better stop or I'd be totally covered. So let me tell you about some of these injuries. Example number 1. I was running a 50K trail race on Orcas Island, and less than 1 mile from the finish, I landed on my left foot and felt a twinge in my leg. In the course of about 10 steps, I went from running to jogging to walking to limping. That was frustrating. As I hobbled to the finish, this guy I had recently passed me back, and of course, a couple minutes later, another handful of runners who I'd never even seen passed me, and I guess that's the way it goes. So that injury was a fractured fibula. The cause, unknown. I guess just bad luck. Example number 2. Several years after college, I got my first desk job. This happened to correspond with a time when I stopped going to the gym to work my core and do some general strengthening exercises. Can you say perfect storm? That winter, I was skiing, and after catching some air, I landed in a twisted attitude and suddenly collapsed. The injury this time, a herniated disc in my spine in that sort of classic lower back area. The cause? Weak muscles that could not support the level of activity I was doing. Example number 3. I was doing some running intervals, and this is actually relatively recently, like 2 years ago, and got really sore the following day. This soreness got progressively worse until I finally saw someone who, with the help of an ultrasound scan, diagnosed it as hamstring tendinopathy. In layman's terms, that just means the tendon which attaches the hamstring muscle to the bone is messed up. The fibers aren't aligned and it's not functioning properly. After hoping it would get better for almost a year, and then going back to my physical therapist and trying some PT for 6 months with zero improvement, I went back for another ultrasound. And what do you know? Not only is there a tendinopathy in the hamstring, but it also has a big giant tear now. So the injury this time was a hamstring tear and also an adductor tendon tear. The cause, once again, was my muscles were not strong enough to support the level of activity I was doing. And also, turns out that my normal posture, I have kind of a sway back, tilts my hips forward and puts a little bit additional stress on my hamstring 24/7. So I've had to do a lot of work to stand taller and actually straighten my spine instead of doing what to me feels natural, which is to kind of kick my butt out like that. Trust me, there are way more examples than these 3, but let's move on. What I want to emphasize is that I have tried to use all these injuries to grow and learn. So, you know when your physical therapist has you do an exercise in the office and then tells you to keep doing it at home? Right. Well, that was me with my back, which I re-injured twice, until I finally got religious about doing my core exercises. And now, if I keep doing that, about 3 times a week at least, I can do these long bike rides and these long runs that I love, even though my back isn't fixed. Same thing with my shoulder. The joint is loose, and if I don't work all the supporting muscles in the joint, it starts to ache and get weak. And even some simple movements, like just swinging my arm while I'm running, can become really difficult after several hours. And with my hamstring, I finally had to find a tendon specialist. Hoping it would improve just wasn't working. So what this doctor did is really cool. He performed a procedure called 10X, where he goes in and it's guided by ultrasound, and he literally vacuums off all the bad collagen that your body's been depositing on the tendon to try and fix it in vain. And then he gave me a PRP injection in the tear, and this promotes healing in the correct way. So tendons, if you've ever seen them on a cadaver or in a picture, they're totally white. They're not oxygenated at all. They don't have any blood running through them. And that's what this PRP injection does, is it kickstarts the healing process. I have been back for 2 follow-ups now. My tear has disappeared entirely, so that's grown back. And now I'm in the process of doing some eccentric exercises to specifically strengthen the hamstring. And my doctor is very optimistic. He thinks I'll be pain-free in about 3 or 4 months, and I'll be 100% in about 9 months. My care providers, and sometimes my wife, have frequently reminded me that all these things wouldn't be issues if I just lowered my expectations. But I'm going to say, forget that. Slowing down with age is inevitable. And although people running marathons in their 70s is a total edge case and not something the average person should expect, I know I have several years of adventure left in me, and I'm not done looking for new challenges. Plus, I hate operating with what I perceive as an artificial governor. Aging is one thing, but I'll do anything to perform at my current potential, whatever that might be. And that is the big lesson I learned. Sometimes you need to do the work in order to do the things you love. In my case, it's going to the gym and getting massage and seeing a care provider at the first hint of pain instead of waiting until it's a giant problem. And if I do that, I can run and ride. I got into competitive athletics relatively late in life. Sure, I raced bikes in college, but never as a junior, and I didn't, hit the BMX track or anything like that. And after about 10 years of that, I took some time off before experiencing the inevitable beginnings of a midlife crisis and coming back to race in the Masters category. And I didn't really start running until I was 45 years old. So being new to this activity, in my mind, I was always wanting to improve and to go faster, to perform better, and to get the most out of my body. And I'm doing just that. My times kept coming down for several years, and as recently as 2017, at the age of 53, I won the overall at the Bigfoot 100-kilometer trail race, which is a very rugged lap around Mount St. Helens. That is definitely one of my proudest running accomplishments. And that running event just happened to be sandwiched between a fast one-day Seattle to Portland bike ride and an aggressive ramrod, which is a 155-mile ride around Mount Rainier over a couple of mountain passes. So for 2 weeks there, in 2017, I was feeling like Superman. It was pretty fun. But I was and am under no illusion that this initial trend of going faster would continue forever. And I'm okay with that. As fun as living in the past is, I also really enjoy the present. These days, I keep looking for ways to optimize my body and my performance, no matter what. I can't recapture youth, but I can definitely do things that will help me improve. So here are some of the things that I have learned as I've immersed myself in the sport of ultra running. There are things I understood conceptually when I raced bicycles, but running has really brought them into crystal clear focus. Pacing. I think this is the most common mistake everybody makes in an endurance sport. At the beginning of a long effort, everything feels so easy. And consequently, most people go out too hard. And when I say most, I mean almost every single person. You will always slow down in an ultra, and the trick is to slow down as little as possible. In 2018, I returned to the first ultra I ever ran, and although I was 6 years older, with the help of better pacing, I smashed my personal best time on that course by 30 minutes. So it took me a while to figure it out, but I finally have a handle on that, and it's worth so much. Sure, the overall winner was an hour and a half ahead of me, but I didn't care. I was so psyched. Nutrition. This is a big topic. Most people show up at a trail race or even a road race and just consume whatever the organizer provides. This might work for a few people, but it does not work very well for most, especially if you're trying to go hard. You can't really train your body to run well on a specific fuel, but you can figure out what kind of fuel works best for you in training. Training isn't just where you practice your activity, it's also where you test everything else, like your food, your clothing, your gear. Also, the quantity of fuel you consume is very important. Some people like to describe ultra trail races as an eating contest, but that is way off the mark. There is no physical way you can assimilate the same number of calories you're burning while working hard. The maths just don't work out. If you try, the result is usually something like a massive cramp or throwing up on the side of the trail or both. Ever since I adopted the less is more fueling plan, it's been a revelation. Obviously, too little is going to result in you bonking and dreaming of donuts, but if you get it right, you can still go super hard and not run out of energy. The same thing goes for hydration. To a point, of course, less is more. I'll get a little technical here. When you eat within 3 hours of endurance exercise, it raises your blood sugar. This reduces your body's ability to burn fat as fuel and also means you will instead burn through your finite stores of muscle glycogen. Your goal should be to make this limited store of muscle glycogen last as long as possible because once it's gone, you need to stop exercising in order to replenish it. And why should you care? Well, because muscle glycogen is the most readily available fuel for your muscles at that endurance pace. While you're exercising, your body reduces the blood flow to non-essential organs. And while you're running, your stomach turns into one of these non-essential things. If you stuff it with food, the side ache you get is your body saying, hey, I can't digest all this. Also, salt does not equal electrolytes. For example, your muscles require calcium to contract and potassium to relax. So salt doesn't contain either. So if you just consume salt tablets, you're going to be losing a lot of something that's really important. So look for a product that contains a full stack of electrolytes if you want to supplement while you exercise. Lastly, how much you drink also affects your electrolyte balance. Too much water is just as bad as too little. So again, there are all kinds of rules of thumb out there and traditions about how much water you should consume per hour, per pound of body weight. Don't give too much credence to those and instead figure out what works for you. The key here is to practice. And then don't deviate from the plan just because you get free treats at the event. Gear. When I first caught the running bug, I thought this is so simple, right? To ride a bike, you need all this special clothing, a fancy computer, cycling shoes, and if you were serious, things like a heart rate monitor and a power meter weren't really optional. But when you're running, heck, just put on some shorts, grab some shoes, hit the trails. Well, as we all know, there are huge categories of gear for every sport these days. But even if you don't want to accessorize, having socks that don't give you blisters and a comfortable hydration pack and shorts that don't chafe is key. Key. Believe me. And in case you have not been to any of the specialty running stores lately and seen all of the running lubricants that are available, rest assured that chafing is a thing. You don't need lube until you do. And trust me, the first time you do can be a real come-to-Jesus moment when you get in the shower. And oh yeah, by the way, power meters, they exist for runners too now. All right, efficiency. Some people hang out at support stops for quite a while. I have learned that the longer I stop moving, the harder it is for me to start going again. And so my motto these days is just to keep moving. As I run toward an aid station, I will frequently get out my bag of powder or pull out an empty water bottle, whatever it takes to keep my time at the aid station to a minimum. Just being super efficient about my stops has helped me trim 15 to 30 minutes off of my time on a given course, even when my actual running speed has gotten a little bit slower because of my age. If I had to boil this point down, it would be to keep moving and to plan. Your goal in prepping your gear should be to make all actions and decisions as easy as humanly possible. If you love orange slices, take the time before the run to peel some oranges, separate all the segments, and put them in little plastic bags. You'd be amazed how daunting it feels to do simple stuff like take off your running pack just to access some food late in an ultra. Sometimes it's just too much effort. Rest. When I was younger, I could train hard maybe 3-4 days a week. In fact, there were many weeks where I would race my bicycle on Tuesday night at Pacific Raceways, go to the track on Wednesday night, go back to the track on Friday night, and then do some road race on the weekend. Youth, right? Now, I can only do like one hard day a week, unless I plan on taking it easy for an extended period of time after stacking hard days back to back. The same goes for sleep. Sleep deprivation is not something you can or should ever train. And if I don't get enough on a regular basis, I am drained. One thing I've learned in ultra running that I didn't notice so much in cycling, and perhaps it's because I'm also a little bit older now, is your body only understands stress. That stress can be the miles you logged that day on the road. It can also be the fact that you and your wife had an argument, or you're not getting along with your boss, or a coworker is giving you some real passive-aggressive vibes. So all those things compound. And if you don't get adequate recovery from all that stress, you're never going to be able to perform at your best when it comes time to compete. Also, if you don't give yourself adequate time to recover, all that time you spent going hard is wasted. Let me tell you why. People often think training is what makes you stronger. Well, it's actually during the recovery from efforts when the improvements take place and your fitness is gained. So if you don't take the time to recover properly, you're going to not only gain fitness, but if you keep it up, your fitness is actually going to decrease. So you don't have to look at this slide too much. One of the things that facilitated my transition from bicycle racing to running was I had gotten a little burned out on the structured training that's required to go fast on a bike. If you want to do well as a racer, you need to not only log the miles, but you need to also do the hill intervals, the time trial sessions, the threshold work, all that kind of stuff. Of course, if you want to be the best runner possible, you will need to do some of that too. But if you're just running ultras and your goal is to challenge yourself and just finish these amazing events, then you can pretty much just run more. This was a big motivator for me to go long instead of focusing on fast. So, like I said, the font on the slide is small on purpose because it doesn't really matter what it says. I needed to do what I wanted, and that was fun. Have fun. I've got a friend that hates running on trails for exactly the same reason that I love it. He's always worried he's going to stub his toe or trip and would rather zone out on some straight, flat piece of asphalt. To me, a straight, flat piece of asphalt is like some level of purgatory. I relish the need to pay attention on trails because it distracts me from the effort. On the road, all I can think about is how my left foot doesn't feel quite right, and there might be a little hot spot in it, or how my shorts are riding a little higher on the right side, or how chapped my lips are. Also, when I stopped racing bikes, I realized I was enjoying all the roads and hills I had started to dread as a racer. While racing, it seemed every training ride with my teammates turned into a flurry of KOMs, or survival of the fittest. And that's a huge mental strain, and it wore me out. It also drained the fun from an activity that I really, really love. By contrast, training for and running ultras was like getting to spend all day in the woods doing what I enjoy. It wasn't that I never wanted to challenge myself or compete. For sure, I wanted that. But I didn't want the constant pressure to compete against others. That seems to consume so many other people. At this point, I was, and I am, very happy just trying to get the best performance out of myself that I can. When the pandemic hit and race after race was getting canceled, I found myself questioning why I was running. I soon realized that what I really cherished was having events on the calendar to look forward to and to train for. But these events did not have to be a race. So, adventures. Turns out my sister is also an avid runner. In fact, she's been just plain running and running ultras way longer than I have. Here's another fun story. In college, my sister and I grew apart, not because of a family rift or anything, But she had her interests and I had mine, and she moved to Eastern Washington and I stayed in Seattle. When I finished my first ultra back in 2012, I vividly recall emailing my father and sister to tell them what an awesome thing I had just done. Check this out, everyone. I ran 31 miles through the woods. My sister replied, "Oh yeah, that's a great course. I've done that a few times." Right? Mic drop, and cue the sound of a deflating balloon. But it's all good. Since then, I have run with my sister a ton, and it's been so cool to reconnect. We have run 2 ultras together. I have paced her at several others. We have traveled to races literally all over the world to go do our own thing, but to run the same event. And we have run the Seattle Marathon together now for 9 consecutive years in a row. So that's awesome. Not to mention, my sister is a huge inspiration to me. Her attitude is fantastic, and she's always smiling no matter what. Like in this picture here. It's a hot day, but Luca is wearing a hat and a jacket because her body is just totally shut down after crushing a 100-kilometer trail race. It was so great to pace her for the last 30 miles. So when this pandemic shut everything down and all of my races got canceled, so did my sister's. And this resulted in us having time to schedule some sibling runs and check a couple of awesome items off of our bucket lists. In early August of 2020, we ran around Mount Rainier on the Wonderland Trail. This is about 95 miles, and the scenery is simply off the charts. We were there when the flowers and berries were booming, and wow, such great memories. I could have brought 100 pictures, so let me just share a few. Later that same month, we ran Section J of the Pacific Crest Trail, which is the piece from Stevens Pass to Snoqualmie Pass. This is about 75 miles and is one of the most incredible sections of that trail. And lucky for us, it's right in our backyard. I literally did take over 100 pictures on each of these runs. So thank goodness for digital photography. This piece of trail right here is the Kendall Catwalk, which is about 10 miles away from the Alpental parking lot, or Snoqualmie Summit. So 10 miles north of there. We're heading south. A lot of people will go up here as a day hike. They'll park at the Pacific Crest Trailhead, hike up here, take a bunch of pictures, and go back. And it is spectacular. And since we did both of these runs in August, we had pretty amazing weather the whole time. So I want to emphasize that with all this running, I didn't lose my love of cycling, no way. I still ride enough to enjoy, as opposed to suffering through, events like Ramrod and the Passport to Pain, which happens right here on Vashon Island. I've done this ride a couple of times, and I hope to come back this year. And my wife and I have even traveled to Portugal for a mountain bike tour, which we liked so much, we did it again the next year. It was 2 weeks long, and covered 1,100 kilometers and went literally from the top of the country all the way down to the Mediterranean. I also challenged myself on the bike in 2020. Prior to these 2 runs with my sister, I rode from her house on the west side of Lake Washington to her house, just north of Leavenworth, via as much gravel as possible. Turns out, this route is about 160 miles, and I got to revisit some of my favorite places, like the train tunnel at Snoqualmie Pass on the Palouse to Cascades Trail, Smokey's Barbecue in Cle Elum, the old Blewett Pass Highway, and the Mountain Home Road above Leavenworth. And since I mentioned it, no doubt some of you have heard of the latest cycling craze called gravel. What a blast. I discovered this a few years ago, and I even like going on gravel rides with my ex-racer friends, as they seem to slow down and enjoy the views when there isn't an official finish line. The barrier to entry for gravel seems way less than for mountain biking, and when you're on Forest Service roads and logging roads and converted railway grades, the views are usually much more spectacular than from a single-track trail in the woods. You can also cover a lot more ground on gravel than you can riding technical trails, which means doing things like riding from here to Leavenworth is feasible. Did I mention bike packing? Well, let me do that. This is just another awesome activity that does not require speed or even extreme fitness. You just need super low gears and a realistic time schedule to get where you want to go. Last summer, a friend and I decided to finally explore the Olympic Discovery Trail and rode all the way out to Forks on the west coast of Washington State and back. Talk about an amazing resource. That trail is phenomenal. I've also ridden the Olympic Adventure Route a few times, which is a single-track alternative to 25 miles of the Olympic Discovery Trail, and it's amazing. Another huge thanks to all of you for being here. This is super fun. I have, if I have learned one thing while getting older, it's that you can still do things. And if you work at it, you can even get better no matter when you start. It's my goal to keep doing the things I love as long as possible. I want to say thanks to everyone that supports my desire to keep challenging myself and pushing my limits. And in conclusion, I'd like to play you a 3-minute video that sums up how I feel. When the movie is over, I'm done. So we'll stop it, and I'm happy to hang out and answer questions or chat, whatever you like. So let's see if I can navigate to this.
We can see what else you watch on that site.
Right. Yeah. If that were my account, right? Oh no, we need sound. Who can help me out with sound?
Martin, would it be down there at the bottom there?
Yeah, it's not muted. It's not muted. So how do we get sound to come from the computer to the audio system here in the auditorium? Okay.
Where were you when you took this video?
I was up the Icicle Creek, just outside of Leavenworth.
Growing up, I used to always be really inspired by people who maintained an active lifestyle throughout their life. I remember when I was 15, I thought 30 was ancient. Now I'm in my 50s, and fortunately, I've been able to keep doing a lot of things that I've always wanted to do. When I first started running, I had no idea that I would start running ultramarathons. I jumped in with both feet, and when some of my friends signed up for a race, I signed up right along with them. When I finished my first ultramarathon, I was crushed physically, but mentally, I was on top of the world. It felt like it had opened the door. Something I never thought I could do, would do, I had just done. And it was like, well, even while I'm sitting there getting sore and achy, I'm thinking, what's next? What is the next distance that I can accomplish? I think there is some satisfaction when you prove people wrong. They say, oh, you can't run 50 miles or you can't run 100 miles. And you're like, well, I just did. I don't really race to win, but I don't feel like I'm done doing the things I want to do. And getting out there and trying a 50-kilometer race or a 50-mile race or a 100-kilometer race or a 100-mile race, each one a little bit further, each one a little bit longer, each one a little bit more challenging. It's exciting to see what you can do with your body and your training and your mind to reach the finish line. I constantly feel like I'm a 25-year-old person in this older body. And every once in a while, the physical reality of being in my 50s catches up with me. But I really am thankful that I still have that mentality of wanting to try things and not feeling like I have to be limited. Instead, I'd like to go out there and find out what my limits are, and I haven't really reached my limits yet. I hope I can run for a long time. I don't know how long that's gonna be. I see people a lot older than me, and they're still doing it, and they're still getting a big kick out of it. And that's who I wanna be.
I thought I could grab that mic and pull it out of the stand, but maybe I can't. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy. Yeah,
Mark,
Bruce.
you've been through enough transitions in athletic performance from hardcore racing to then realizing, wait a minute, maybe I'm just adjusting, trying to go longer. And some of us in the crowd have got about 10 years on you. And have you thought ahead? It's like, all right, so how do I land this? Where do I eventually get to? I've got friends that are about 10 years older than I am, and they're still doing this thing. And I spend a lot of time trying to think, like, how do I land this thing eventually? Where does this ultimately go? Do you ponder that?
Yeah, so the question was, you can't keep going longer and harder forever, so what happens when reality catches up? I don't think I'm trying to compartmentalize reality or age. What I want to be able to do is to keep challenging myself at whatever level I am able to, no matter what my age. So I may not be able to run, these super long races in 10 years. And that would be okay with me. But if I can still keep moving and still enjoying the things that I'm doing, then that's my goal. I see people who are 15, 20 years younger than me, and they're done. I don't want to belittle them or anything, but I just don't want to be that person, right? I don't want to be reduced to this, restricted movement and ungainly gait when I'm 40 years old. I want to keep trying what I can.
You talked about during a race and liquid recovery and maybe tablets, cell tablets, that sort of thing. What about recovery? How can you keep doing this day by day, especially at this age? What are the things that you do methodically to make sure you can get up the next day and hit it again?
So the question was about recovery and about how do you ensure that you can keep sustaining this level of activity day after day. There are a bunch of things. So first of all, consistency is key. If you run 3 miles every day, that's way better than trying to go out and run 10 miles once a week. Especially when it comes to running, because your body really does need time to adapt to the stresses of the activity. Another thing is you just can't go hard very often. It's way better to run easy and maybe throw in a couple of strides than it is to go out there and just try to kill it, or to run at sort of what feels like a moderate pace the whole time, because that will catch up with you and will wear you out. And you have to throw in more and more easy days, or what you might call cross-training or a different activity, just to give your body a chance to rest up. For a runner, or someone who identifies as a runner, I actually run a lot less than some of my friends, and that's because I do a lot of this gym stuff and cycling, you know, and that keeps me fit and keeps me active. But I found if I run 7 days a week, or even 6 days a week, my body tends to break down, and I do get more injuries. So you have to figure out what works for you, but I would say the biggest things are consistency and getting adequate recovery, whether that's off days or some different physical activity that isn't putting the same type of stress on your body as your primary activity. That's what's worked for me. Yeah?
So what exactly is the schedule for, say, your 95-mile run around Rainier or a 100-mile ultra race? How's that?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question was, so how do you train for, you know, a 95-mile run around Rainier or one of these 100-mile ultras? If you think about it, traditional training plans, like for a half marathon or for a full marathon, right? You work your way up in distance until you're almost doing the race distance, and then you taper a little bit, and then you go do the race. Well, you're not going to keep escalating your training runs to 50, 60, 70, 80 miles and then go do a 100-mile race. That's ridiculous. So, again, consistency there is huge. If you're used to getting out there and doing, you know, long-ish runs on a regular basis, like maybe every week going out and doing 20 miles, every weekend, sorry, and then doing some other running midweek, if you combine that with proper pacing, then, and that's key, then you'll be able to finish a much longer race. I'm not saying you can jump from doing 20-mile training runs to a 100-mile. You do have to try some of the intermediate distances, like a 50K, 50-mile, 100K perhaps, before you jump up into the big ones. And now, if you've been reading sports news, you know, there are these 200-mile and 250-mile races, and it's kind of going bananas. And people are doing all these FKTs on, like, the entire Arizona Trail, or, you know, all kinds of, you know, ultra long stuff. So to train for the big things, I would say pacing is crucial. But there's so much other stuff that goes into it, right? Like nutrition. You need to figure out what you can eat when everything tastes like crap, and how much of it you need to consume. And you need to recognize when you're running low on energy, and hopefully do something before you get that low. You know, they always say, if you're feeling good and you're not hungry, that's the time to have a little snack. Don't wait until you're like, oh, you know, I'm about to pass out. That sort of thing. Hopefully that answers some of your questions.
You spend a bunch of time dialing in what your diet is, just your regular daily diet, not associated with event day, but just, and you spend a bunch of different, I'll try this, I'll try that, got the magic now?
The question was, do I spend a bunch of time dialing in my daily diet? I would say no. I've tried a few things. I had a friend who swore by paleo for a while. I tried that for 4 months. I thought it was fairly healthy, but also a little inconvenient and pretty expensive. And I found that ever since college, I eat a very healthy diet. When I was a kid, I was you know, just as picky as any other kid, right? My foods had to be white or yellow, not green, and you know, I couldn't have salad, but I would have a couple of vegetables if they were carrots or something. So, you know, crazy. I'm sure I drove my parents bananas. Something happened in college, and I started to like all the stuff I used to hate. You know, I was eating whole grain bread, I was having kale, whatever, you name it. And I still like everything today, so there isn't any food that I'm not having. And I think that's probably the biggest or the best advice anybody could give you is, you know, if you eat a variety of things, not too much of any one thing, then you're going to be pretty well off. And then also, I don't know if you were specifically asking this, but yes, you do need to find out what works for you when you're exercising, when you're working hard, right? When your heart rate's elevated and your body is shutting down blood flow to some of these systems that normally digest food. Not everything that you would normally find appealing is going to work. For instance, on my first 100-mile, I thought, I'll have these wraps, you know, awesome, like turkey, avocado, it'll be so great. Well, I got out there and I couldn't choke down the tortilla. I ended up opening up the wrap, eating the turkey and the avocado, and throwing the tortilla in the woods because that bread, I just couldn't gag it down. I didn't have enough saliva in my mouth to, you know, make it go down my throat. One thing that's worked really well for me while exercising is liquid fuel. I really like that a lot. A, you don't choke on crumbs or you're not having to gag it. B, you get a little bit of hydration, especially if you mix it weak and you drink a lot of it, then you can get a lot of your water that you need and you don't have to supplement with extra plain water or whatever else. And it's just super easy on your stomach, you know. It's basically already chewed, ABC food. And if you eat it, your body will have to do minimal work to assimilate that. And so that's a big, big bonus. So liquid fuels have worked great for me.
Describe those more. What are they?
Well, full disclosure, I'm a sponsored athlete by Hammer Nutrition, and they have a couple of products, particularly Perpetuum, which I really, really love. So Perpetuum has some protein and some fat in it, so it's specifically a fuel for longer events where the intensity is a little bit lower. You would never drink Perpetuum, you know, during a criterium bike race or during a 10K road race. You'd want just like, you know, a sports drink or plain water, something like that. But during these long events, when your heart rate isn't jacked, Perpetuum is phenomenal. It gives you all the stuff that you need for forever, theoretically, right? Sometimes you need a variety of foods just to, you know, keep your palate satisfied and to make you feel full. But you could subsist on Perpetuum and maybe some electrolyte tablets for, you know, 24 or 48-hour events. My guilty reward. What is my guilty reward? You know, I have a lot of them. But also, let me qualify that. I don't have too much guilt when I eat them. I think I've tried elimination diets in the past, and they always fail because as soon as you remove something or tell yourself something is off limits, you know, you want it that much more. And I just don't have the mental strength to be like, I'm gonna do this all the time. So instead, what I try to do is just have sensible portions. So I eat a ton of dark chocolate, or rather I eat dark chocolate regularly, but I don't have an entire chocolate bar every night, right? I have a few squares, maybe every other day. Same thing with whatever, you know, if it's pudding, ice cream, donuts. Some of the worst things maybe don't appeal to me. Like if it's just super uber sweet, it's not something that I'm a huge fan of. But then again, I like ice cream, and ice cream is pretty sweet. So lots of pleasures, very few guilts, and I try not to deny myself anything really, because then I just am going to overcompensate and have too much when I do finally have it.
Donuts. I'm glad to hear donuts are on the list. You got any advice for us? You've ridden P2P a couple times now. What did you like about it? What could we improve?
Well, that's a tough one because so much about the Passport to Pain is amazing. So the question was, what could be improved about P2P? Let me tell you the things that I think are awesome that I hope never change. So the enthusiasm of all the people who show up at the aid stations, who staff all the aid stations, it's great. They all have a theme. They're in freaking costumes. You know, how fun is that? Especially because it's not a race. You know, I show up and I take pictures of everybody on that ride. That's awesome. The barbecue at the finish, amazing. So good and so tasty and so hits the spot, right? Back to that guilty pleasure question, sometimes I'm not really craving anything sweet. What I really want is savory, especially after these long things, these long events. It just seems so much more satisfying and satiating than something sweet. So the barbecue, I think, is outstanding. There's good course marking on the road, too, for all the different courses. You have different colors, from what I recall, of arrows that go and point you the right direction. I love the fact that a lot of the roads seem to be out of the way, so they're not the busiest. I guess on Vachon, you don't have a ton of choices, right? If you want to do all the hills, you have to ride certain roads. But they aren't that busy with cars, so that's really cool. Like some of that stuff on the, I guess it's the west side, which is where some of the extreme hills are, I've really never seen a car on those roads when I've ridden them. And I've come over here a couple of times just to do like a training session, you know, to refamiliarize myself with those hills. So I can't think of anything that I would improve. Maybe if you had crappy weather, you know, a big roof in the start-finish area. But I also haven't had crappy weather on this ride. So I think you're coming up aces so far. Yeah, for sure. So
So you said that you had a recovery plan, 6 to 9 months for your high hamstring tendinopathy, but you have Waldo coming in 3 months? And Waldo's a very difficult mountainous 100K. What's going through your mind as you're approaching that, thinking, I'm not going to be at my 6 month in 3 months. So
yeah, so the question was,
how do you risk?
with this hamstring injury, you know, how do I adjust my goals, or how do I plan my life with some big events on the calendar still? So a couple of things. First of all, even though I'm technically registered for that race, I've mentally kind of let go of everything this summer, either because of the pandemic or because of injury. So if I can't do the race for whatever reason, I'm not going to be heartbroken. So that's the first thing, is to prep yourself for whatever might come. Secondly, I am still going to run the race even if I can't be competitive, but if I think I can just finish it, you know, safely and be healthy at the end and not aggravate any existing injury. So I can enjoy it in two ways. One, I can try to push myself and try to get a great time, try to get on the podium. Or two, I can just enjoy the scenery and try to nurse myself, you know, down the trails. That, I have a little bit of experience on the course because that's where I paced my sister. She ran that 2 years ago, and so I've run the last half of the course. And from what I hear, that's the more technical and more difficult part than the second half, or than the first half. So I've got an idea of what's coming, at least. And so I don't think I would make that decision lightly if I decided to eventually run that, or to actually run it.
I thought I recognized the picnic table.
Yeah, at the bottom of the ski area.
You know, I've got my eye on our clock here, and I'm aware that we actually got to get you to the ferry boat. So you're not on the lake, is that correct? It's on the 8:30. So, Martin, thanks very much for coming here and talking with us. I greatly appreciate it. I learned a bunch tonight. So.
Thanks, you guys.
Pretty clean for a gravel bike.
Is that your gravel bike?
Yeah, it is.